let's talk about what empathy is for a second, because
Mm.
I think that the false narrative that many people tell themselves to say, oh, empathy will make me look weak, or empathy is going to make me perform at a lower level because I'm going to care too much, whatever mythical thing they're telling themselves in their heads. Number one, as I mentioned to you before we started recording, empathy is innate to us as humans. It's how we have survived as a species. For some of us, the muscle has atrophied. For others, we've maintained environments where it's been celebrated, rewarded, and modeled, to your point. But that doesn't mean you can't intentionally build that muscle up again if you want to. And so you just got to get to the gym.
Maria, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Aaron. This is going to be great.
Absolutely. My first and most important question is, how are you doing? Like, actually, for real, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you for asking. It's been tough. It's been a tough summer. I mentioned to you before we started recording, my family moved this summer. It was like a major move, and major move for me and my husband, but really major move for my 10-year-old son. And so we've been navigating that and making friends and getting to know our new city and our new neighborhood. But it's been a good experience so far. But I think we misjudge how off kilter major transition makes you when you're older. Because when I was younger, I moved a lot. But as an adult, when you get entrenched somewhere, so things are good. We're getting settled. And we're going to have our first Christmas in our new home. So we're excited.
Amazing. What's it like to make friends?
How much time do you have? Luckily, I'm an extrovert, so that helps. Also, when you throw a neighborhood happy hour and invite people over, it gets a little bit easier. I think you just, I follow the advice of a good friend of mine, Shasta Nelson, who is an expert in friendship. And she writes about making friends as an adult. And you really just have to make yourself vulnerable and reach out and say, hey, I like you. We're vibing. Like, let's go have a cup of coffee and follow up with people that you enjoy and that you like. That's the key. Because everyone will say like, oh, let's get together. Right. But you've got to really follow up with people, make it happen.
Yeah. Do you, I didn't think I was going to go in this direction, but here we are now. But do you ever hesitate to tell people that you research or write about or advocate for empathy, because then it sort of puts you in a position where you always have to be this person who's empathetic, and like, what if you don't? What if they throw it back in your face and like, oh my God, all these things could potentially happen. I always think about that when anyone's like an expert in anything, like the woman you just mentioned, she's an expert in friendship. Well, what if she like says the wrong thing or does something wrong? It's like, well, I thought you were the fucking expert, lady. Because like, what's happening?
Because just because you research something doesn't mean you're not human. And when we're talking about things that are very human and very essential to our experience of being human, I work at empathy every day. I just because I research it and I understand the connection of it in how it boosts business and how it boosts engagement and performance from a leadership perspective, it doesn't mean I'm perfect at empathy. I like to say I'm an empathy expert, but I'm not an expert in empathy. Like, just ask my husband or my son on any given day. We come at life daily with different capacities and different emotions and different moods. And we're not always going to show up as our best self. It doesn't matter whether it's something we've researched for 30 years or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's like what it boils down to, at least when you're like trying to build great relationships, is the effort and the intention.
Yes.
Obviously, actions are always going to be most important. Like, it is what it is. That's what life is based on, actions and results. But the effort you put in and the intention you have is super important. Like, it makes me think about Stephen Covey's like emotional bank account. Like, I'm just depositing, and now one day you walk home, Maria, and you had a tough day and things didn't go your way or whatever, and with your husband, you've built that emotional bank account. So if you aren't as empathetic, or you're quick to judge, or you seem annoyed, like, that withdrawal is super easy. But it's much harder in your case, right? If you're building new friendships, you don't have that emotional bank account to draw on. So you try to present your best self, and sometimes that can be tricky because then you're like sort of trying to conform. And there's so many different things that happen, like just in meeting new people and trying to create friendships.
Yeah. I'd say in my, my 52 years of life, like, the best bet is be yourself. And if you click with someone, you click with them. And if you don't click with them, you don't, but you're not clicking with them under false pretenses. So kind of your original question was like, do I ever get afraid to tell people that I research empathy? I mean, I come at this work from a business and a brand strategist perspective. So my work is around consulting and around helping teams perform at their highest levels. So no, I totally love to tell people. I think sometimes they get uncomfortable because they think I'm going to judge their level of empathy or not. And that's where you just have to be really honest and say, look, I don't get it right all the time either. Like, I'm not this perfect paradigm of empathy at every given waking moment. But people are intrigued, and they will give you some grace when you're late to meetings, for example. I will say that, if they're like interviewing an empathy expert and you're like 2 minutes late, they tend to give you a little bit more grace.
That's it. That's
They
funny.
don't want to seem unempathetic. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you talk about that a lot with like this sort of the selfish motives that could potentially drive us to be more empathetic. And that's that's a prime example right there. So anyways, before we get into that, I did want to just touch on sort of the basic idea of leadership, in terms of the qualities you see that make great leaders outside, of course, getting to being an empathetic leader, but what other qualities have you seen in working with people that they might represent?
Yeah, I think it's all related to their ability to have good personal relationships with people. And it doesn't mean you have to be touchy-feely. It doesn't mean you have to be an extrovert. It doesn't have to mean you have to be the most charismatic person in the room. But to your point, it's the people that are making an effort to connect in whatever way is accessible for them. That's really where I see strong leaders shine, and understand that when you put people first, the results and the success follow. And that doesn't mean you put people first at the expense of the goal or the mission or, whatever the prime objective is. You still, as a leader, have an obligation to an organization or a team to deliver a certain result. What I'm seeing is, what I'm out there trying to do is to explain to people, look, we have to let go of this binary leadership paradigm that says that you can only be empathetic or effective, empathetic or high performing, compassionate or ambitious. That really hinders our growth. That hinders our progress and our ability to be as successful as possible. When you follow the method of a both and leadership philosophy, you can be empathetic and high performing, empathetic and hold people accountable. When you make space in your brain to hold both of those seemingly opposing, but not really, things to be true at the same time, that's when you become a catalyst as a strong leader. And that's when you sort of unleash the potential of your team, remembering that your team is just a collection of people who happen to all be working for you or happen to all be a part of this organization, if it's a volunteer organization, for example, or they've all signed up for the team, right? They're bringing their individual life experiences, they're bringing their individual strengths and their individual challenges and their individual emotional triggers. And the job of a good leader is to be able to harness that and navigate that for the good of the mission, for the good of the purpose, while also helping those people be the best versions of themselves that they can. That's actually the leader's job. And what happens, especially in workplaces, is that you tend to get promoted based on your ability to do something. Like, you're really good at this certain skill. Now you get promoted to a leadership level. You're not a doer anymore. Now your job is to be a leader. There's a difference between a manager and a leader. Managers manage tasks. Leaders inspire people. And so we need to have that adjustment. The people that have been most successful as leaders have been able to make that adjustment, that I'm not the doer anymore. My job primarily is to make the time, to build the connections, to get to know my people, to inspire them, to empower them, to mentor them, to guide them. And that's why, we were talking earlier, even within sports, why some of the best coaches follow a philosophy of empathy over command and control. Because command and control is great in the midst of battle, but it's not great for empowering people to do their best on a daily basis.
Yeah, I love this idea of both and, because I've seen it sort of play out over my lifetime as an athlete and as a coach, I also did improv when I was training to be a professional wrestler, and that's like the cornerstone of improv. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and
Yes,
because
and.
if you don't do that, the whole fucking show ends
The
right
conversation
there.
ends,
It's
right?
done. Like there's just
Right.
nothing that happens, and the same
Right.
the same can be said about this. And so, like the best coaches that I've ever been have both. Right? They're tough. They're really tough, but what allows that relationship to flourish is at the beginning they expressed how much they care about me, and they showed that care for me in a real, genuine way. So when they are tough on me, I know what place it's coming from. If I've never shown that love or care and I just scream and yell and like, yeah, you may get some people who are just like, fuck it, I'm just going to go because I hear the information, I'm just going to do it. But majority of people are like, this is not my flavor because I don't really know if this person cares about me. And so you see that on the sports field. Like prime example would be like Detroit Lions right now, Dan Campbell. You've seen that dude cry on camera, cry in the locker room, cry in press conferences because he just has so much raw and real emotion about his guys and where they've come from being like 1-16 to being 12-2, and like how they've built this together. And he still makes mistakes as a coach and they forgive him. And all these sorts of things are amazing. And you just see it play out in real time. And that's a tough-nosed dude. He played in the NFL. He's a big guy, but he has his players wanting to run through a brick wall for him. And you can see his real emotion. You can see his empathy for his guys. And it's like the most beautiful thing. And we have this like role model because we have so many shitty, excuse my language, male role models that live on social media, that we can have someone like this who's like an actual role model in a way that we can develop empathy as men, or strong masculinity in this healthy sort of version of it. I think that's super powerful. Not to go on a little tirade.
Well, I mean, I think it's important to understand, like, let's talk about what empathy is for a second, because I think that the false narrative that many people tell themselves to say, oh, empathy will make me look weak, or empathy is going to make me perform at a lower level because I'm going to care too much, whatever mythical thing they're telling themselves in their heads. Number one, as I mentioned to you before we started recording, empathy is innate to us as humans. It's how we have survived as a species. For some of us, the muscle has atrophied. For others, we've maintained environments where it's been celebrated, rewarded, and modeled, to your point. But that doesn't mean you can't intentionally build that muscle up again if you want to. And so you just got to get to the gym. It's just like any muscle, right? And when you first start working out, it might feel sore and uncomfortable and weird. But you just keep going. You keep doing the reps, and all of a sudden it becomes part of your default operating system. But this idea of empathy is not crying on the floor with people. It's not caving into unreasonable demands. It's not people pleasing. Those are all elements of submission and acquiescence, right? Empathy is a method of information gathering. It's being able to see, understand, and where appropriate, feel someone else's perspective, and then use that information to act with compassion. Now, acting with compassion can look like a lot of different things. It can look like, yes, it can look like a hug, or, both crying with each other, but it can look like just giving somebody space to vent, or giving somebody very clear and constructive feedback, or understanding their context so you can find a next right step to take together. For example, in the workplace or even in sports, oh, the reason you really messed that up is because you actually haven't developed this one skill well enough. And now that I have that information from you and I'm understanding your perspective, it's not that you don't care, or it's not that you can't. It's just that you haven't been trained in this one skill. So what we need to do as a compassionate action is get you upskilled and get you ready to go so you can succeed, because nobody wants to come to work and fail every day. So from a practical standpoint, leveraging empathy when you're giving performance evaluations or just evaluating anyone's performance, whether it's in sports or on the job, is not to go in and berate and blame. That's not going to meet your objective. If your objective is to get your team to perform and win, berating somebody is not the way to do it. What you want to do is meet that person with curiosity. Hey, Aaron, what happened to you out there? Like, what's going on? What's going on right now? And getting you talking and getting curious to understand your perspective. Once I get the information, now we can figure out a way forward together. But I can't do that if I'm going to make all these assumptions about you. You're lazy, you don't train hard enough, You don't show up to work on time. If I don't know what's going on for you, whether it's something to do with the job or something going on in your personal life, then I can't find a solution to solve it. And again, if the goal is to create a winning team and to get results, that's what we have to keep our eye on. And that's what really smart leaders do when they embrace empathy to achieve high performance.
Mm. Yeah, it's very interesting because it shows up a lot, just like the empathy is a weakness. You know, why would I need to feel what someone else feels? I need to worry about me and my thing. But like it just makes so much sense, because if you want to build a great culture, you have to be, like you said, the most important word is curiosity. Like that just like sort of almost solves everything. It could solve the political divide. It could solve different relationships, like just literally being curious, not in agreement, because that's just not super
and
possible
empathy
with
is
every
not,
person.
Yeah, empathy is not agreeing with someone. It doesn't mean you agree with them or even condone their behavior. It just means you are trying to understand their context and why they see things the way they do or why they feel the way they do. I talk about on my podcast on the Empathy Edge, I've interviewed people talking about how to do layoffs with compassion. It doesn't mean you change the decision or you change the difficult decision that you have to make, that tough business decision. It just means you do it in a more human way. And you do it in a way that leaves space for someone to process their emotions, to feel their feelings, to react the way they're going to react. But also it's a way of going into the conversation that you're going to have, the hard conversation, in preparation. So empathy is, I'm going to give you some bad news, or I have a tough decision that I have to make that impacts you and you're not going to like it, right? What can I do to prepare? How can I think about, well, what might Aaron think or feel about this decision? What resources might he need? What support might he need? What questions might he have? And prepare myself so that when I go into the interaction with you, I can meet you where you are. And also I can ask questions of you. What do you need? I can I can do some planning ahead of time, but that's also about me making some assumptions about you. But I wanted to go back to this point you made because, again, when we were talking about it's not crying on the floor, there's actually two types of empathy. There's cognitive empathy, which is where we use our brains. This is very accessible for analytical left brain people. I can imagine what something might be like for you without getting emotionally involved at all, right? I can say, what might you be thinking or feeling? What questions might you have? What might this be like for you? I can use my head. It's a brain exercise. Emotional empathy, or affective empathy, sometimes it's called, is when I actually start feeling the emotions that you're feeling. So you're upset and you're angry, and my palms start to get sweaty. My heart starts racing. I start relating to the feeling that you have. You're scared. I know what it's like to be scared. I'm relating with you, right? But I don't have to access empathy that way. I can access it through the cognitive door too. And that can still lead to compassion. And that is much more accessible for certain people, depending on how they operate, depending on neurodiversity. What are they able to do in order to connect with someone? Because the goal of empathy is about connection, not conversion or coercion. So I can find my way into that. And then I can start to cerebrally think, oh, you might be scared. You might be angry. Have I ever been scared and angry? Yeah, I have. I know what that feels like. I've just made the connection with you. Again, I don't have to be overly sappy or overly emotional about it in order to have an empathetic connection.
Yeah. But wouldn't an important part being, especially if you're a boss or a leader, about making some assumptions about me, that you've done the sort of prerequisite work to maybe get to know me a little bit? Like that's got to be
100%. 100%. That's
so
that's the only danger of cognitive empathy, is that you could make assumptions and your own biases could lead you to make assumptions about somebody. Excellent point.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's why there's this guy named Dr. Michael Gervais. He used to work for the Seattle Seahawks. And now he's just a sports psychologist and works with a bunch of businesses. And his sort of main theme, maybe you might know him, but his main theme is like, we want to be relationship first and everything else comes after that. So if we can then be relationship first, which is like what you're saying, like lead with curiosity. What's this person next to you? It's not like you have to be best friends with everyone, but man, knowing just like a little bit about them just goes such a long way. And like, if you're going to spend 8 hours with someone, you might as well like become friends with them. Like it could be cool. Right. Like you never know,
well, and
you know? And so then from there, go ahead.
No, sorry. I was going to say, you know, you don't have to be friends with everyone you work with or every teammate that you have, but you can be friendly and you can care about them as human beings. Right. And to your point, you know, when have you ever done your best or done above and beyond for someone who treated you like crap? Right. Again, if our goal is to get the team to perform and accomplish a mission, accomplish a purpose, accomplish an objective, it behooves us as leaders to get to know our people and get to know what's driving them, what motivates them, what their values are, what their aspirations are, and to understand the different ways that they think. I interviewed someone for the latest book, for the Empathy Dilemma, and he talked about his CEO made everyone on the executive team and actually every employee take the Enneagram, which is a self-assessment tool. And he believes very strongly in this, in getting to know each other from a team perspective, so that then when you have conversations, you know, I know, Aaron, that you're a whatever number on the Enneagram you are. So I have an idea of how you might reply or how you might respond. Or, you know, Aaron is someone who needs more time to process and think before he speaks. Maria is someone who speaks off the cuff and brainstorms out loud. Like just knowing that about your team members helps you navigate things that could be misunderstood or that could become really crunchy, right? And so when you really get to know people, you start with yourself. The first pillar in the new book is self-awareness. You got to know how you show up and what you bring to the interaction. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are your blind spots? And what are your emotional triggers? You need to know who you are so that when you get into an interaction with someone, you're coming from a solid foundation. Because you mentioned earlier that there's a lot of people who think empathy is weak. Empathy actually requires great strength. It takes a lot of strength to take on someone else's point of view without defensiveness or fear. And when our capacity is low, we're tired, we're hungry, we're upset, we're frustrated, we're frazzled, we take everything coming at us as an attack. And that's not productive. That's not productive if you're actually giving me information that I need, or giving me information that is going to be useful to me making a good, smart decision. So to be an empathetic leader, you actually have to be really, really strong. And you have to know yourself very well and understand where you need to work on improving and what you also bring to the table.
Yeah. It's the same way I think about being vulnerable. And I learned that through sports, because most people don't relate sports with vulnerability. But if you really think about it, going out there in front of people and trying your very best and knowing that you could fall flat on your face in front of 10, 20, 30, 40 people is the most vulnerable thing. Missing the game-winning shot. That's scary as fuck. But if I'm willing to go for it, then that means I can go for it in other places in my life. And it took me a long time to realize that. Especially had to realize it when I started getting into a committed relationship and I wanted to be a husband. Like, okay, I can be vulnerable, but like, where have I done it before? Where's the experience? Like I've gone for it before. Why don't I really go for it here now? And if I'm going to go for it, I can be, you know, in the middle of the street naked, hoping that that person receives my love. Maybe naked wasn't the right word for a romantic context.
Well, for some people, you don't know.
Yeah,
no, I love what you're saying. I love what you're saying, because that idea of vulnerability is so misunderstood. It's equated to, if you want me as a leader to be vulnerable, that means I fall apart. That's not what it means. It means you're just honest about what you know and what you don't know, what you're good at and what you're not good at. And you can be confidently vulnerable. You've probably worked with coaches that are like, look, I'm not the best at doing this and I'm working on it. And here's what I expect of you guys. You know, that's one way to show vulnerability. Another way to show vulnerability is to open yourself up to connections with people and to say, yeah, I could try to get to know someone and that might bite me in the butt later. I don't know. When I'm meeting, you were talking about making friends earlier. I don't know who's going to be a good friend and not a good friend, or who's got my interest, my best interest at heart, and who might double cross me. I can't go into new relationships with that I could, but it wouldn't be very effective. But it would be better for me not to go into new relationships with that perspective. I have to assume positive intent until it's proved otherwise. And that in and of itself is an act of vulnerability. I'm going to, Aaron, you and I just met. I'm going to trust you that I'm going to be on this podcast with you and you're not going to make me look bad and we're going to have a good conversation and have good rapport, but you don't know. And that's, to your point, vulnerability is also showing up and making the attempt. We too often think vulnerability is just this like, oh, I'm just going to be like weak and I'm going to show that I can't handle it and I'm going to end up in a sobbing mess. That's one way of showing vulnerability, I guess, but you can show it in a confident way as a leader and not lose people's respect. You actually gain their respect by them going, wow, you see me and I can relate to you. And also you model it for your people that are reporting to you, that like, oh, Aaron can admit that he's not good at this, that, or that he's working on this skill, or he can open himself up to new connections and new relationships. I should do that too. I know that I can find success on his team if I operate in the same way.
Yeah. What are the other pushbacks you've gotten from trying to get leaders to be more empathetic, if there are any?
Well, I think we talked about a few of them. I think the big myths are that it's about being nice. Empathy is not the same thing as being nice. You can be really nice, but it doesn't mean you see my point of view or you want to understand my perspective. It just means maybe you bake really good cookies and you bring them to work. I don't know. It's nice is sometimes often about us more than it is about the other person. Because when you're empathetic, you're thinking about what the other person wants and needs, not just what you would want or need in that situation. It's like, that's the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have done unto you. Empathy is do unto others as they would have done unto them. What do they need? What do they want? The other pushback is, oh, my team's going to walk all over me. If I try to be empathetic, it's going to be chaos. It's going to be anarchy. Empathy has nothing to do with not being decisive and not being clear. And that's why those are two of the pillars in the new book, The Empathy Dilemma, clarity and decisiveness. Because when you are clear and decisive in a way that makes room for other people's perspectives and input, you give people a way forward. That's actually hugely kind. It's hugely empathetic because now they know what mission they're on. Now they know what's expected of them. You can't hold someone accountable to an expectation you've never set. And that's true at work. That's true in sports. That's true in relationships. We can't read people's minds. So clarity is actually not just kind, like Brene Brown says. It's empathetic because I don't leave you in the dark, because that creates fear, that creates anxiety, that creates stress. And I'm also decisive, and not decisive in a dictatorship way, but in a way that invites input and invites different perspectives. But then I need to be able to swiftly synthesize that and then make a firm decision so that people know what the path forward is, right? Can you imagine, a coach or a general in battle, like, well, I don't know. What does everybody else want to do? Like, where should we go next? What should we do next? I don't know. What do you think? You have to have a little bit of decisiveness, gathering input, of course, so you can make a good decision, because someone might bring up a really good point, or someone might, reveal a risk or an opportunity that you didn't see from your perspective. So you want to synthesize other input, but you want to make a firm decision even when it's hard, because you're never going to make a decision that is going to be 100% consensus or that's going to make everybody happy. And then when you do that as a coach or as a leader in a business, you say, okay, here's the decision I made and here's why I made it. And be transparent about, this is what we considered. And, Aaron, your idea was great that you had, but the reason that we didn't move forward with that was X, Y, and Z. But please keep those ideas coming, because it actually made us have a really good conversation about something that we didn't think of before. So you want to continue to encourage input without shutting people down, but you do want to be decisive and make a path forward for people so they know where to go next.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't imagine like being around a leader or a coach who's like, yeah, I think we'll just do this next.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
What do you guys like? Let's vote on it. Yeah.
What? You sure? Hey,
Totally.
we'll attack this city. Like, I feel like back in the day when they were like
Yeah.
wars were happening. I guess wars are happening all the time now. But
I know.
anyways,
Yeah.
someone was like, "Hey, maybe we'll just go to this city next, and like we're
I
good.
don't know.
Like, bring
Yeah, we
your
good?
arrows, and we'll be all right." It's like those leaders were like so
Yeah.
authoritative. They were like,
Yeah.
"We're doing like," and people followed them though. There's some
Right.
stuff we can always learn from people in history, but
Yeah.
it's interesting. I feel like it's taken us very long time to realize like people don't want to be like berated and reprimanded all the time. They want to
Yeah.
be encouraged, and they do like people do like high standards. They like high standards in the
Of
way that like,
course.
oh, you see me and I'm capable of this, and that's awesome.
Yes.
I'm going to fucking try my best to get there. And I think that's amazing. Because people are capable of like the coolest stuff and the best stuff. And if we can encourage that in them, like wild to see all the, technological advances that people are creating and the books that people write and the conversation, like all of that stuff is incredible. And someone inspired them to do it, or they had a standard they set for themselves, or something happened where it was an encouraging moment where they were allowed to express themselves in that way, which is unbelievable.
Well, to your point, that's the other pushback I get. You were talking about pushback is, well, if I'm going to be empathetic, that means I have to lower my standards. Those are two totally different things. Being empathetic is about understanding someone's context. No one ever said anything about it being lowering your performance standards. But what empathy can help you do is if someone's not meeting those standards, you can actually have an empathetic conversation with them, with the goal being you want to get them up to the level you want. You don't want to sink everybody down to their level. And, we were talking earlier, one of the coaches I admire the most is Steve Kerr. And I have the last chapter on my book kind of profiles him because his driving value as a coach is empathy, because he understands the importance of motivating people based on who they are and what they need. But it doesn't mean you say, oh, it doesn't matter if we win a game. It doesn't matter if we win a championship. No, he created a championship dynasty with that philosophy. And so this whole thing of if I'm going to be empathetic, that means I'm not going to be high performing is bullshit, because we've got coaches out there showing us they're in such a binary industry where they either win or they lose, right? There's no more clear stakes or objective than that. And when you have some of the best coaches, and he learned it from Phil Jackson, like when you have some of the best coaches winning championships that way, you can't tell me that empathy has no place in leadership when that is their secret weapon. They've been public about it and saying it's about coaching to the player, coaching to who they are and their strengths, and helping them through their challenges and being there for them and coaching them in the way that best works for them. And that will win you championships. That will help you get to the highest levels of performance. But you don't have to lower your standards in order to take on another person's perspective.
Yeah. It's the definition of your theory of both and it's beautiful because it makes total sense. Another thing that's been both anded, if that's a phrase, in sports is
totally. We're making it.
Is this ability to work really hard. And that was always only the goal in sports. You just have to work. But now it's an and both with rest and recovery. And I think that's such an important piece, because especially if you're going to work every day, you can't show up to work every day if you're not getting the appropriate rest. Now I get if you have young kids at home and like things are hectic and those things play a part, I understand.
Right.
But if at least now there's a what's the word, like an emphasis on, hey, we should rest too, because that's how we get to the edge of our capacity. That's how we become the best version of ourselves. So that's probably my favorite sort of both and, like, yes, strive for excellence, but also like get some freaking sleep, please.
Well, that's why self-care is the second pillar of my 5 pillars. Yep. You have to have your battery recharged. You have to have your capacity full in order to be the most effective leader, and to practice empathy in a way where you're not getting walked all over. And so, that looks different for different people. Self-care is not just like manis and petties and massages. That's self-maintenance. Self-care is whatever recharges you, whatever rejuvenates you, whatever gets your brain lighting up in different areas, or, what is fueling you body, mind, and soul, right? So for some people, it is yoga and meditation and things like that, or something very restful, always a good night's sleep. But for other people, self-care is active. It's rock climbing. It's training for a marathon. It's knitting. It's carpentry, whatever it is that sort of refills your tank. And I love that we are finally paying attention to the science. And this is being, led and pioneered by athletes who understand the work and rest cycle. You understand that you can't work out to your personal best every day of the week. You have to have rest days. Your muscles have to have a chance to rest and recover and get stronger. And it's the same thing in every aspect of our lives. We have to have that period of working really hard, and then we have to be able to pull back, or the whole thing falls apart. All the machinery falls apart unless you give it a chance to rest and rejuvenate. And so to your point, I'm so glad that that's been a conversation in sports and beyond, because even from a mental health standpoint, that is so important, of being able to take care of yourself so that you can show up with full capacity and not be a hero. What gets me is the leaders that talk the big game about, you need to be taking your paid time off. You need to be taking vacation. And then they're working 16-hour days, because actions speak louder than words. And unless you are modeling these behaviors for your team, they're never going to think it's safe enough for them to do it, because they're always going to know in the back of their heads, but Aaron didn't take the weekend off. He checked his email while he was on vacation. That means I must have to do that too. So we've got to get out of this thing that's okay to tell our team one thing and act in a different way.
Yeah, that's huge. I know you've mentioned a few of the pillars, 5 pillars of empathy, but I want to make sure that people are clear on all 5 of those, and then they can check out the book if they want further detail on those. But let's just run through those just to make sure, because you mentioned a few of them: of self-awareness, self-care, decision, decisiveness, joy, and then I forgot the 5th one, but clarity. There we go.
Yeah, and so I want to be really clear with people. These aren't necessarily the pillars of empathy. They are the pillars of being both and an effective and empathetic leader at the same time. And so if you're struggling to be people-centered and high-performing, or if you're struggling to care about your people, but you're burning out, it's supposed to be a framework so people can look and see if one of these pillars is too weak. So that's kind of the intent of having the pillars, is if you've got these pillars shored up for yourself, you have a higher probability of being able to be both empathetic and high performing. And I got them by deconstructing from hundreds of interviews and years of research with leaders who were empathetic and high performing, and trying to say, what was the recipe? Like, what is it about what you do that enables you to do this in a way that it seems like you're doing it effortlessly? And these were 5 common threads that kept showing up over and over again in these leaders and in their leadership style. So I mentioned self-awareness, self-care, clarity, decisiveness, and joy. And we've kind of talked through the first 4, but joy was one I added later after doing more research, where I was like, there's some other element at play here with these leaders that is helping them form better connections and enabling them to see, hear, and value their employees more and their team members more. And it really was joy. And I don't mean like being funny all the time. Not all of us are natural comedians. It just means that you bring some sort of levity to the work, even when the work is hard, or even when the work is not joyful, right? Are you letting people relax a little bit? To your point you made way earlier about, being friendly with each other at work. Do we know each other personally? Is there room for camaraderie? Is there room for laughing at ourselves? Is there room for celebrating mistakes so that we learn from them? Are we creating a culture of creativity and play and risk so that we end up producing better results? And so joy looks very different depending on your culture, depending on your leadership style, but it's really just finding those opportunities, and they can be so small and feel so insignificant. Like in the book, I talk about, bosses that brought levity to their teams during the lockdown by, having really fun Slack channels dedicated to like, what are you making for lunch today? Or, where do you want your first post-lockdown vacation to be? or, doing activities with their hybrid teams where they were doing wine tastings or beer tastings or chocolate tastings or whatever it was. It's, sometimes people think those things are frivolous, but they're really not. They're really about helping everybody get to know each other as whole people and not just within the role that they play within the organization. And that element of levity, you kind of alluded to this earlier when you said this, but one of the C-suite leaders that I spoke to he was one of the examples I had in the book about canned fish Mondays, which I'll let people read the book and discover what that's about. But he said, I didn't do it on purpose at first, but then I started to realize that bringing that levity into the team was a really good thing because the work does get hard and it is a grind. And he's like, and then at some point, I'm going to have to ask somebody to do something really hard and really difficult. And I want them to be able to trust me because then they can say, I know he wouldn't have asked unless this was really important. And you made that point earlier about, banking that goodwill and banking that trust, because that joy and that levity builds trust. It builds resiliency within your team to be able to bounce back from failure better. And, I even have in that chapter, you'll love that, some points about improv and the tools of improv being used for teams to be able to help build that trust and build that creativity.
Yeah. Joy is amazing. I tell this with my players all the time. Like, you have to love doing the thing because at some point it's going to get really hard and no one's going to care if you love doing the thing. They're just going to care if you get the job done. So it's internally thinking about, okay, yeah, I know my work day is not always going to be great and things aren't going to go my way and I'm not going to love every second. But the underlying thing is I do enjoy showing up and doing this work because there's some sort of purpose attached to it. I have some sort of connection here. Like, okay, great. Because when it gets hard and I got to work extra or do this or it didn't go right or I got the right, okay, I get it. Now it's hard, but I still have this underlying foundation that I've built of I do love doing the thing. No one loves doing practice for 6 straight hours and you do the same fucking drill over and over and over and over and over and over again. But I signed up for this. I understand the cost of my goals and there's joy involved in this idea of doing this thing. And if leaders can create that atmosphere and that culture, God, are they going to get some badass people doing some really good work, which is how you create companies that change the world and how you write books that change the world, all these sorts of things that happen.
Yeah. And it's also, again, work is not joyful every moment. Like I hate doing invoicing. I don't like doing budget spreadsheets. For some people that is joy, right? For certain people, they love doing spreadsheets. Yeah. But I mean, the point is not that you have to have bliss in every single second or moment of your work. The point is, are there moments where people can let off steam? Are there moments where they can get to know each other as people so that now you're not just Aaron, the guy in accounting that I need to, who's going to bug me about my invoices, whatever. You're a human. I know about you. I know about your kids. I know, we can have a little bit of levity about this of Aaron, these invoices suck, right? It's yes, I know, but we all have to do them. So having that ability to let your guard down, there's brain science around the fact that when we are under fear or stress or anxiety, and you may have heard of this from the parenting world when they talk about kids having tantrums, your cognitive abilities shut down. You think of your brain like a fist, and that fist is completely closed, and you're not able to access your executive functions, the things that you need to do good work. You're literally in survival mode, primitive survival mode. So what leader wants to have a group of 20 people that are operating with half their brains functioning? How can you be innovative? How can you be creative? What it does when you create both a culture of empathy, but also a culture that includes levity and fun and joy, is you enable people to relax and let those cognitive functions function the way they're supposed to, those executive skills, to really be able to access them in a useful way. And now you can hear each other, you can listen to ideas, you can take risks, you can take your time, and it just creates a better product or a better solution in the end. And so, we need to pay attention to the science that, again, we are organisms, we are living organisms, and what happens to us and how we're treated impacts the quality of our work. We don't park our humanity at the office door. Whatever's happening in the world or in our lives or to us by our bosses or by our peers, it's going to impact our ability to work effectively. And so it's not one of those things where it's like, well, think about that on your own time or whatever, because there's no such thing. We're who we are out of work just as much as who we are when we're in the office or in the metaphorical office if you work remote. But and we're finally starting to realize that. That's what's really exciting, is like we're finally starting to realize that when people talk about bringing your whole self to work, that's what they mean. They don't mean letting it all hang out and showing up in your pajamas. They mean that you should be able to be who you are on the outside as much as you are on the inside within professional confines, right? Within professional conduct, but you're impacted by what's happening in the world and what's happening in your life. And the leaders who understand that and help their people navigate around that to be able to do their best work are the ones that win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then I think it's a good point to ask you about sort of the other side of empathy when people weaponize it. What happens there? What does that mean? How can maybe we combat that or prevent that from happening?
Yeah, I mean, it's a term I coined called weaponized empathy, and it's when someone is using your empathy against you. And that's where people start to become doormats, right? When people start to become taken advantage of, which is usually the fear around empathy. But again, if your pillars are strong, you'll recognize it and you'll know what to do next. Weaponized empathy is something that I was hearing it, again, not common. I want to be very clear about this. These are outliers. People who know the things to say to their managers to game the system, to work to get what they want, right? So an example of someone I spoke to anonymously for the book is, I asked this person to work overtime. There was a client emergency and I asked someone to work overtime. And they said, well, that request is actually overstepping my boundaries and I'm not comfortable with that. And so I'm going to take a mental health day to process that you've asked me to work overtime. And the leader was just like, what the hell just happened? But they were using trigger phrases that it's like, oh, HR is going to get involved. HR is going to get involved because I'm crossing boundaries. I'm not giving them space to process. But that person knew exactly what they were doing because it was actually an underperformer that was saying this. So they were leveraging, they knew their leader was very empathetic and wanted to be seen as very people-focused and empathetic. And they were manipulating that person by weaponizing empathy against them because they knew immediately that person was going to back off. And that's what I mean by weaponizing empathy. But again, this is why the pillars exist, is if your pillars are strong, you're self-aware, you're taking care of yourself, you're going to meet that attack, I guess I'm putting that in quotes, but that assault with a little bit more groundedness. And you'll be able to, instead of just going, oh, you're right, forget it. You're going to go, Erin, that's a really interesting statement. Tell me more about why you think I'm crossing boundaries by asking you to work overtime when our goal is to serve this client. Like now I'm coming at you from a very grounded perspective. You can't take advantage of me when I do that. And yet I'm still trying to listen to what's going on for you. And I might find out something interesting. I might find out something about why you can't work overtime because of what's going on in your personal life, but you haven't manipulated me into making a decision that I don't want to make.
Yeah. The one that I see frequently is empathy hijacking. That one's pretty it happens a lot when because I do a lot of work in the mental health space and I own a nonprofit called You Are Loved. And this happens a lot there.
Yes.
And I want to say with good intention, right?
Totally good intentions. Yeah.
Because I'm telling you about my issue and I'm feeling sad today, or it's been hard for me to get out of bed the last couple of days. And, I just got a lot of stuff going on. People will immediately interject right there. I got the answer. This is what I did. Here it is. And they're probably giving good information, but they're hijacking the conversation. And now the conversation is not about the person speaking. It's about me and how great I did and how good I did. and like you just got to slow down a little bit. But any thoughts on that? Obviously,
yeah. I coined that term, empathy hijacking, out of just my own experience as well. And by the way, I'm guilty of it too. We were talking earlier about being an expert. I've done it, and many of us do it in an effort to connect. We want to make someone feel less alone, right? So you tell me something that happened to you that's really bad, and I go, oh my gosh, Aaron, I know exactly how you feel, because one time this happened to me, and here's what I did, and here's what I felt. And now I'm off on my own narrative, like you said, and I've decentered the narrative from you to me. But that's actually my attempt to connect and make you feel less alone, right? But we have to remember that there's a time and a place to share your own experiences. And you can be vulnerable and be transparent. We were talking about vulnerability. And I can ask you, wow, the first thing I should do is acknowledge what you're feeling before I launch into, I know exactly how you feel, because I don't know exactly how you feel. I'm not you. I don't like the expression walk in their shoes, quite frankly, because it's still me walking in your shoes. But I like the seeing their perspective, like, give me the binoculars so I can see what you're seeing, right? I can say like, wow, that sounds really hard. That sounds really tough right now. That's a lot you're going through. And now at least I've acknowledged that I heard you. I'm not talking over you. And then I can ask what you expect of me in the conversation. How can I best support you in this conversation? And this is a little tip I give to leaders or managers or coaches. If someone comes in and they're complaining or they're angry or they're upset, I can ask them what they want from me. And I can say, do you want me to see it? Do you want me to solve it? Or do you want me to just support you? Now, see it means you just want me to know about it, right? You're just telling me this issue is happening. You want to vent a little bit, whatever. Solve it is like, no, I want your help brainstorming some solutions. Now you know the person is open to advice and open to like problem solving state of mind. Support you might be just giving you space. Or it might be, what resources are available that can help me through this. So, but instead, and I'm guilty of this, I do this with my husband all the time, I run right to solving, because it's my instinct to just try to remove the pain as quickly as I can. So did you email this person? Did you call this other person? Did you tell this other guy that this happened? And he's like, I'm just venting. I don't want your solutions right now, because they just make me feel bad that I didn't think of them on my own. But there could come a point when someone is ready for those. And I have an example in the book about a leader who had to hire someone in above somebody else. This person was a really good worker and really good at what they did, but they were a little too green, a little too junior to do some of the work that needed to be done. So they wanted to bring in a manager over her. And it was actually going to give her a career path, because she would actually have a way forward, and give her a mentor to help her with some of these challenges. And this leader was a C-suite leader and actually had gone through a similar thing years ago in their career, where someone was brought in over them. And that relationship ended up being the best thing that had ever happened in his career. They ended up making a great team, and he learned a lot from this person. So he could have said to the woman that they were bringing someone in, I know exactly how you feel, because earlier in my career, this happened, but it actually turned out to be a good thing. Instead, he said, I know exactly how you feel. I'm seeing that this is upsetting. I get that it's upsetting. And a similar situation happened to me in my career. Would you like to hear about that now, or do you want to talk more about that decision? And she actually chose to hear him out at that point in time. But the point was, he asked for consent and didn't hijack the conversation. And that went a long way to building trust, and then her ultimately making a good decision and being okay with it, and then having a good career path forward. But yeah, we do it, like you said, we do it with the best of intentions.
So good. Such good intentions.
Yeah. We do.
But I like that, asking those questions. I think I'm going to start doing that with my wife when she comes to me with some sort of issue. Because I'm the same. I just want to, you have a problem, let's solve it. because I love you and this is like, I want to do,
Right.
but sometimes it's like, who cares about the solution? Let me just
Right.
talk to you about it for a second. And then we'll just
Right.
like sit with it. And then when I feel
Yeah.
like I've gotten it out, then cool, let's do a
Yeah.
solution for it.
They want to get the emotions out first, and they want to
which
just
makes
be
total
heard.
sense.
Yeah. And then
which
that's
makes
a
total
great, I
sense.
mean, and let's like, we need to just stop making assumptions. Like, just ask, like, do you want me to just listen right now? Maybe later we'll talk about some options or alternatives if you, or are you ready for, are you looking for some brainstorming right now? And they'll probably say, no, I just want to be heard, especially in a personal relationship. It's like, okay, I know my role here. Right?
Great. I'll listen, I'll do my best. And here we go.
Yeah.
But speaking about relationships, I'd like to ask you a little bit more of a personal question.
Sure.
Because I'm very interested in this as I coach young boys. Hopefully I'll be a father soon, God willing. And you have a young boy. And obviously you're probably trying to develop healthy masculinity in him and all these sorts of things that are great.
Yes.
How do you think about interjecting empathy in that sort of sphere of developing healthy masculinity for him?
Well, I mean, he's a big reason why I went into this work is because when he was, and I talked about this in my TEDx talk, when he was about 2, I was reading him books about empathy and compassion and sharing and collaboration and all the books you read, 2 and 3-year-olds. But then when I looked up at the examples of leadership that were making headlines at that point in time, they were being anything but empathetic. And I really got discouraged because I thought, what's the point in teaching my son these values if the world he grows up in are going to reward leaders like this? And so instead of giving up, I decided, no, I know I've experienced empathetic leaders. I know they're out there. So I started researching who, what leaders and what companies and what organizations were winning with empathy. And the data and the research was out there. It just hadn't been curated. And so I was really heartened to find examples. And I think that's part of the work is shining a light and normalizing effective empathetic leadership instead of letting these toxic examples take over the narrative, because they are actually, for the most part, the outliers. We've got to make them the outliers, not the good bosses being the exceptions. We've got to make the bad bosses be the exceptions. And so, I started with him from a young age of like reading books and, reading a lot about how do you teach children empathy. And, for example, reading books to him when he was younger, taking a pause and saying, wow, what do you think that character is feeling? What do you think that character might do next? Look at the expression on the picture. What do you think they're feeling based on their expression? And I would try to interject that into his learning, where he would start to practice thinking about what someone else's life was like. I also did something that I advise for adults to build their empathy, and that is to explore with their imagination. So read books, listen to music, watch documentaries about made by or about people who have a different life from you. This way you practice that capability. You practice that, I wonder what that's like. And I wonder what I would do in that situation. You start to take yourself out of it and think about it from their point of view. And I try to do a lot of that with him. And whenever I have that opportunity, now he's 10 and a half, I try to make him think about when he sees a news story or he watches a movie, what do you think that person was thinking? What do you think that person was feeling? And for those of us that are parents, we know that often our kids show their worst behaviors only to us. So I was always like, is he really empathetic, or is he going to be the least empathetic kid in the class? And then I'm going to look like an idiot because I talk about empathy. But I am delighted that he has had teachers who have actually commented on how empathetic he is and how he's always the first to help. He's always like the first to like jump in or see if a friend is struggling, he'll like lean over and help him. And he doesn't necessarily do that at home, but at least he's doing it in the world. So I think, and the biggest thing I can say to that is you have to model it. You have to, again, it's another case of actions speak louder than words. And so when I talk to, even if I'm not talking to him, but he's within earshot and I'm talking to my husband about something like, oh, what happened to them? Oh, that must be really hard. What happened to them? I can't believe that. What do you think they might need? What do you think what could we do for them? to help them? Like, how can we find out more about what's going on for them? And he's listening. His ears are always open, and he's listening to those conversations, and he's seeing how we interact in the world with other people and where service plays a role in our lives. And that will do more than us sitting down and lecturing him about what it means to be empathetic.
Yeah. Yeah. More things are caught than taught, as they say.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. And I'm sure you do that with coaching too. It's like, wow, that kid must be having a really rough time. Like, what can we do to help that teammate? And getting them to just, it's a developmental thing. I will add that. Like, there's a certain point in their development where they are capable of empathy, because early on they are very self-centered. They're trying to make sense of their own world first. You can't expect them to be empathetic at 3 or 4, right? So it's understanding that too. But then as much as you can, like getting them to think about when they tell you stories, whenever he tells me a story about a kid at school and something happened, I'm like, oh, wow, what do you think about that? What must that be like for that person? I just try to encourage him to constantly be thinking about what someone else might be going through.
Yeah. Yeah. The coolest thing I've seen on a baseball field with young men in terms of empathy is we had this player. We were coming back in a game and we were down 1 run and he got on first base. And now he's the winning run and he gets picked off at first base and the game's over. And he's like 13. He starts crying, bawling his eyes out. And everyone, other team, our team, was like huddled around him like, dude, it's all right. Like literally, it's all good. It's like,
I love that.
And so that stuff doesn't happen all the time. You got to be in the right environment with the right coaches on both sides who encourage that sorts of thing. Not to pump, to my own horn, like it probably just happened because these kids are great. But like that stuff is possible. And it's real in even in a competitive environment where both teams were trying to win. These kids are 13, so they understand wins and losses. They get it. Like they're about to be in high school soon. Like they want to fucking win. We're in like a showcase. So there was like things that could happen to their career later on and all these sorts of things. And they still decided in that moment that this kid was more important than that because the game was over.
I love that story.
And it's really cool. And it's one of the coolest things that I've ever seen happen on a baseball field. And I've been doing baseball since I was 4, and I'm 32 years old. So.
Oh my gosh. Well, and what's great about that is let's dissect that for a second. I know we're running out of time. What if that hadn't happened, right? If just you and the other coach did it, it would have an impact on them. If just you and the other coach went to that kid and comforted them and said it was all right. Little ears are always listening. Little eyes are always watching. And so how wonderful, because I don't know that all of them would have inherently done it, but because some of them did, it created a model where the others jumped in and also did it. You create a ripple effect. And so that's where, like, don't lose heart if you're in a situation where the whole team doesn't do that. You as the coaches, like, oh, wow, we should really go over and comfort that kid. That must be really hard for him. Even if you had just done that on your own, that would have been a great model for those kids. So I love that story. Well done.
No, it's sometimes great things happen, and you remember them forever. And there's stuff that you want to try and replicate again and again and again, especially when those moments happen. But Maria, is there anything else that you want to say? Did we miss anything? Did I not ask you anything that's important? Thoughts and feelings there?
I just want to make sure everyone leaves with the understanding that empathy is a strength, not a weakness, and it will exponentially increase your success in life, at work, in your community, and your relationships. It's our challenges in the 21st century are very complex, and we can't solve them alone. And we're going to need to rely on our ability to build connections with people in order to move forward.
Beautiful. And where should people go if they want more of you? They just love you and they need more.
Oh, I love it. Well, the easiest place to go would be theempathydilemma.com. That's actually a page on my website where they can download a free chapter of the book, but they can also order the book from there. And then because they'll be on my website, they'll be in my orbit, so they can check out my services. They can check out my talks. I do leadership trainings. I do keynotes. I do team strategy meetings. Interactive experiences, and they can also join my newsletter there. And then I'm on LinkedIn, Maria J. Ross, and I'm on Instagram at Red Slice Maria.
Beautiful. Yeah, all that linked in the show notes below. Check it out.
Awesome.
Go give her some love. And yeah, Maria, I appreciate you. Great conversation. Thanks for the work that you do in the world. And
thank you.
Happy to know you.
Happy to know you too. Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you very much for tuning into that episode. And if you enjoyed it, click right here for another full-length episode of the podcast. And please don't forget to subscribe. But most importantly, above all else, please take good care of yourselves and others. And I'll see you next time. Lots of love. Cheers.